Hola mi gente, welcome back. I'm MsMalcolmHughes, and today we're going to do another book review. I'm very excited because the book that we'll actually be reviewing today is Kindred. Recently on the channel I did a reaction video to the trailer that came out for the new FX series that actually debuts today. I haven't seen it yet. I wanted to come do the book review first. I'm planning to watch it this weekend, so I will have the comparison soon. But today we're just talking about the book. So for those of you who are not aware, Kindred is a book written by the great Octavia Butler, one of the folks who really pioneered sci-fi, Afro sci-fi, all of that. And so this book, though she herself wouldn't consider it sci-fi, as she talked about in an interview, a lot of people would. But what it does is we follow Dana, a woman who lives in California with her husband. Her husband is white. That's important to the story. And they recently moved into their new home, and while they're setting up the space in the library, she is called back to a time of her ancestors. She's called back to the period of enslavement. She's transported back to Maryland, actually, where her ancestors were enslaved, and she's sent there to help her great-great-great-great-grandfather, who happens to be a white man. But it's tricky because this man will not only one day own her people, because he's the son of the people, he's the son of the man who is enslaving her ancestors. This man will, well, at the time he's a boy, but this boy who will grow to be a man will also be the one who will force himself on her great grandmother, and this is how her lineage is conceived. And so initially she doesn't know this. She just knows that she's sent to save a little boy from drowning, and eventually she realizes who he is. She meets her other ancestor, and it's complicated because eventually she does recognize that this is him and this is what will happen, and she essentially has to be the person to save him in order to continue her lineage, but knowing what that will cause and the pain that that will cause. So it's a wild story, not impossible. I remember when I was in elementary school, I also wrote like a slave story. I don't know why in retrospect, but obviously Octavia Butler does it a million times better. But I do really like what she has as that complicated piece. Mine was just a love story. She has a complicated piece of, here's this woman in modern day who has to go back in time to save what will eventually be her lineage and eventually leads to her own life, but it's rooted in difficult choices and trauma, and what role does she play in it. And also, when she goes back in time, eventually she has to play her role, and she has to, though she's different, she has to fall into being a person of that time and essentially being a slave herself. So a lot is happening here, but she does it masterfully, and we'll talk about why. Well, immediately we're dropped into the story where we have our protagonist, Dana, is in the hospital having lost an arm. We find out how she loses that arm at the end of the story. I will not spoil that for you all. Definitely read the book. But that's where we're dropped in. Obviously, everyone thinks her husband did it because, girl, how you lose an arm? With no real explanation. But Octavia does a really good job of pulling us into that world instantly and making us inquisitive enough to want to know what's going on with the characters and to continue reading. One thing I can say I immediately noticed and loved about the story is that Octavia Butler writes in a very conversational manner. It's very natural, easy to read. So though the topic itself, or the topics throughout the book, seem heavy on the surface and can be heavy as you're reading it, the style in which it's written does make it easy to navigate and to consume everything that's on the page. Also, because of that style of writing, we definitely feel like we're on this journey with Dana the entire step of the way. One thing I can say already that I noted that I'll talk more about in my book versus an adaptation video once I watched the series is that they do change Kevin's appearance from how he's described in the book. I won't get into that now, but come back and I'll talk about that more in the video. I already know that from the trailer. I would say one thing that immediately is just heavy is the children who are enslaved, right? Especially the ones who are too young to work. And them, you know, children, we say they're sponges, right? They pick up on what they see adults doing and they emulate that. So you see children playing at slavery. You see children who are pretending to be on the auction block, and you have a young child who's selling a slave, and the way he's describing the young girl, and when he says how much she's worth, she's like, I'm worth more than that. And it's heartbreaking when you see it for anyone, but it's really when you see it on children, it really brings it out home. And I think Octavia Butler did a good use of using the children in that storyline to really drive home the impact of enslavement and the psychological warfare that was happening. Another storyline that really grips you, again, is so Dana has to save Rufus. Rufus is her ancestor from the past. And one thing she talks about with Rufus is that his love is dangerous. And he has a destructive love, right? He loves in an all-consuming manner of control and possession and ownership. But then for me, I'm like, but that's not love, right? So even though Dana arguably loves Rufus, and Rufus thinks that he loves Dana's ancestor, the reality is he doesn't. And he doesn't love Dana either. And I understand that you can say his love is destructive, his love is dark, his love is possessive, but those things are not love. And so though Octavia Butler doesn't come out and explicitly state this, it is really implied, especially with how the book ends. So that's a question that I want all of us to ponder and consider. What is love? And is the demonstration of love, does that undermine what it actually is when it causes harm to another person? I would say yes. Y'all can debate about it in the comments if you feel differently. Though this is a heavier book, I can say because of the style of writing, because of the story and the plot and how it carries you through, when I was not reading this book, I missed it. When I would put it down or be doing something else, I don't know if you all ever have those moments when you're reading and you go do something else and you forget that you were reading. You're like, what show was I just watching? It was so good. And you're like, oh, that was that book. I need to get back to it. It's like that. And the thing that makes this book so timeless is the fact that some of the topics that many of the topics that she's touching on transcend time and are still relevant today. So again, Dana is married to a white man. She goes back into history, finds out that her people were well, she knows that, but they were enslaved. She gets to see them enslaved. She experiences that for herself. But then the reality is, in modern day time, she is married to a white man who is not like that. At one point in time, he actually does go back to history with her. And so what does that mean, right? Can you still be loyal to your race, have a commitment to your race, and marry outside of your race? I mean, I think these are topics that people are still debating today. And so this is something that she was talking about even at the time of writing this book. So I definitely think that that makes it timeless and also timely in modern day as well. So I definitely see why folks would want to go back and adapt this to film or to the big screen. One thing I can say about Dana, and I get that it's hard, right? We all talk about what we would do at another point in time if we were there. The reality is we weren't there, right? But for me, Dana was entirely too understanding of Rufus, arguably to a detriment. She often says that Rufus would hurt her by hurting other people because there was nothing he could really do to her to impact her. So he would inflict pain on others, and that would cause her pain, and it would be a whole thing. And to a degree that's true, but also it's not really, because when it's all said and done, the thing that really pushes her over the edge is when Rufus does want to cause real harm to her. So you get to grapple with that as well. What would you do if you were transported back to a time of enslavement? How would you navigate it? What do you allow? Like, at what point do you take a stand? There's so many questions to ponder here. And I think that's part of what makes the book so dynamic and relevant for so many people. Another thing is, I'm a Pan-Africanist. I identify as Black across the diaspora. And I really appreciate that Butler does use this book at a certain point to really identify and make known her stance by comparison what's happening in South Africa to enslavement in the US, and makes a direct correlation. And when she talks about how many white South Africans would be happy to live in this time in the US and how it's not different. And I really appreciated that. Another thing I could say going back to Dana is, I just have in my notes, I'm like, Dana is a better human than me. Because listen, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, F the peace sign, load the chopper and let it rain on me. Okay, J. Cole. And I'm not that forgiving of a person. You're not about to keep doing nonsense, or every time you say you're gonna do something, you betray my trust, and you go and you do things that are solely benefiting of yourself and harmful to others, and I'm going to keep forgiving you or being patient with you or trusting you. No, I didn't understand that about Dana. It didn't really make sense to me. I get that you're in this difficult situation, so you have to trust to a certain degree, but no. That's one thing about the book. I'm just like, girl, the patience, I don't have it. And I am being a little critical of Dana, but I also am making it known that obviously going back in time is a difficult time. It's a horrific time. No one knows how they would respond unless you're in it. So I get that. So I'm not mad at the way Octavia Butler wrote it. I'm not mad at the character Dana either for the choices that she made. She tried to help where she could. She tried to free people where she could. But it's just a tough situation, and I think that's what Butler wanted all of us to walk away with. It's an impossible situation with impossible choices and limited solutions. So yeah, it was tough. Some of the decisions that were being made, it's just like, why would you do that? But also understanding the time, right? Just so many questions, not enough answers. Did Dana make all the right choices? Could she have done more? Was her choice at the end the right decision? Did she do more harm than good? We'll never know. And I think my last bit is that Butler herself says that she thinks the book should be read as a grim fantasy, not as science fiction. And I think that that's very telling of the book. Though it's dark, it's horrific, it's about enslavement, I don't know if I would have used the word grim, but it's very illuminating for how she viewed this piece of writing. And I could see that aspect to it for her. I think, again, whenever you're talking about enslavement, especially, I couldn't even imagine someone writing it today, right? But especially, she wrote about a couple in the 1970s. And we know that even now, the world has changed so much since then, and ideologically in many ways we've progressed so much since then. So if you take someone from this day and you send them back, it would even still be a completely different story. Overall, I did enjoy it. I think it's a really well written book. I think the story is captivating. I think it keeps you engrossed. Again, you won't always agree with the characters, but you need that conflict to carry us through. And at no point in time was I bored of the book. Again, the style of writing is very casual. The plot points are there. I actually sometimes wonder, I do think the character Kevin, I think more could have been done with Kevin, but obviously he wasn't the central focus of the book. But I think a lot more could have been unpacked there. It's like that's an area that I felt like it was surface. It could have gone deeper. There is some depth there, but a lot could have really been unpacked there, especially with the long-term impacts of what they experience and how it will impact their marriage in modern day. Obviously, you can't do everything in a book without making it super long, so I get it. Definitely worth the read. As you all know, on my scale of read now, read when you have time or read if you want. I would say read it now. This was actually my reread. I read it years ago when I was in undergrad, and just that space of time between when I initially read it and this rereading, it was so moving just to be older and have a different stance and approach to it. I knew that it was special then, but I have a I'm more equipped to analyze the decisions that Dana made now. So definitely worth the read. Read it now. Also check out the series on FX because I would love to discuss it with y'all. Honestly, select few things in life would make me happier. So please read it, please watch the series, and I cannot wait to discuss it in my next video. That is it for me. Until the next time, I'm MsMalcolmHughes, one who believes that books are sometimes better than people. And I hope that you all continue to give time, to be kind to each other, and to have the best day of your life on purpose. Peace. Os amo. Adios.